One of the striking things about the H-2A visa, it's uncapped, so as many farmers who want to participate in it can do so, but only about 60, 70, 80,000 a year use it compared to close to 1 million unauthorized farm workers, because farmers find the system overly bureaucratic, too time-consuming to use, and too restrictive in how they can employ people. So, clearly, if we're going to have temporary work visas, they have to be designed in a way that will attract their use, that employers find user-friendly enough to use them. So part of the problem is that there's all these unauthorized workers available, so that gives them an alternative. But the other part of the problem is that the visa is not well designed, and then the other way in which it's not well designed is that it doesn't. They're not really self-enforcing rights. So as the clip just showed or discussed, when the workers find themselves in a situation with an abusive employer, their visa doesn't allow them to change jobs. So the employer has extraordinary leverage over them, and that is something that really contributes to exploitation in the existing temporary worker programs, which we've seen that over and over again with H-2A and H-2B visas. So on one hand, those visas need to be made more employer-friendly, but they also need to be made more worker-friendly. But you can do both of those things, because what that means is less bureaucratic on the front end, but better enforcement on the back end. Because there are most of the employers who use those programs are willing to pay a fair wage and want to be playing in a rule-bound system. So I think that's really one of the hardest sort of needles to thread in the immigration debate.
Roy Beck, one of the central ideas of a guest worker program is that workers come and then go home.
Right.
Do these workers always go home? Is there a high degree of playing by the rules when you come over the border to pick a crop?
Well, the H-2A system works pretty well, actually. Because of the tight rules, especially not being able to change employers, most of them do go back home. H-2A program, for the most part, I mean, this is the thing, as you say, it's an unlimited program. And it's interesting you use the clip from North Carolina, because the North Carolina growers, instead of each grower trying to figure out how to deal with the bureaucracy, they went together as a co-op. And so the co-op does all the paperwork for them. So the North Carolina farmers use the H-2A program just fine. The Western growers have refused to use the H-2A program. So I do agree that I think you're right that there's some upfront bureaucratic delays that shouldn't be there, because with agriculture, if you find yourself 3 or 4 days before the crop needs to be picked and you can't find the domestic workforce, you got to know that in 3 or 4 days you can get them from the other country. And that can be done. There's no problem in doing that. And so it could be streamlined, but I believe that for the most part, H-2A is a fine system. The reason the Western growers don't use it is because they prefer to use the illegal labor, and the government has not forced them to stop using it. And I want to say a word for the Obama administration, which just recently has really toughened up the guidelines in terms of paying higher wages to the H-2A. If you have to pay higher wages for the H-2A, that means you're going to pay higher wages for the domestic workers. It also requires that there's this huge underemployed, mainly Hispanic, foreign-born, but legal farm worker population in this country that cannot get enough hours of work per year. The new Obama rules tell the growers you really got to work to employ the domestic labor force first. So I think we're moving in the right direction there. We certainly don't need some massive CIR to handle that, and I think the Obama administration is doing very well on its own with executive orders.
Delegate, your state has a big food industry. Is it run basically with immigrant labor, and do you get people wanting to pull on your ear in Annapolis about the rules under which they have to play?
Well, actually, we have 2 major industries that depend on the guest worker employee. The poultry industry, we have the huge poultry industry around the Maryland, Delaware, and the crab industry. We've had increases, last-minute increase, for example, to get crab pickers. It's a horrible job. They're standing in water, bent over, picking the delicious crabs that we all enjoy. I find that we have obviously, to respond to the human being again. The situations in which many of these live, the abusive employment requirements, the fact that they are, how can I say, it's almost slave labor. They're here, they can't move, they have to work under whatever conditions are there. Living conditions are, I think, in many cases deplorable, and they have to pick up and go home. So if it were for me, would I want that kind of life? Would I want that kind of life for my families? I think not. And I think that's why we need to ensure that whatever reforms we make, that we get rid of those abusive practices and the ability of employers to really use individuals as if they were part of tools.
But there are men, and it's mostly men, who come back to the same farm year after year, voluntarily. No one's saying, Jose, you must go back to this farm in Maryland, but they're going.
Well, that's because there's a huge need. There's poverty in our countries. I'm from El Salvador. I'll tell you right now, the economic situation in El Salvador is that there is at least a bad job waiting for you here and no job. Very serious situation, economic situation in our home countries. And to correct you, the crab pickers are women. Primarily women.
Small fingers.
Small fingers, yes, where they can fit better and do more.